If you want to get a mortgage in 2026, you need to watch this first because banks are dropping their interest rates and doling out tens of thousands of dollars in cash just to get you to use them. But while those rates look good today, it can be really hard to know which bank is usually the cheapest most of the time, which is why for the last 2 years I've tracked all the big banks every single day. And in this episode of the Property Academy podcast, I'll start by sharing which bank has the cheapest rates most of the time. And once you learn why some banks look more expensive than they really are, then you will finally know how to figure out which bank is right for you. And I was talking to Susan Edmonds, who's the money correspondent at Radio New Zealand, and she asked me, Ed, do you have any data showing which banks are the cheapest or have the cheapest mortgage interest rates over time? I said, to be honest with you, Susan, I actually do for once. And
once, you always have the data for something.
Well, I mean, I'll always be able to find something. But one of the things that I'm most proud of is this article where I've been tracking mortgage interest rates every single day since about mid-2023, because my wife was overseas. She was in Italy and left me at home for 5 weeks. And so I thought, you know what I'd like to do? I'd like to track every single bank's interest rate every single day to see if I can create a new data set, which we've done, which is very nice. And so I sent this data over to Susan, and we have found which banks most often have the lowest interest rates. Now, what was really interesting, though, is after we released this article, I knew it would get the bank's attention. The banks that were the cheapest called me up and said, Ed, this is great. Can I have the data? And then
the ones that were the most expensive?
Well, at that point, that's where I heard this little snippet on Mike Hosking, and this is what Mike Hosking said to Antonia Watson, the CEO of ANZ Bank, when he's talking to her.
Ed McKnight, do you know the OPES partners thing that he's done on banks and their interest rates?
No, I don't.
All right, doesn't matter. The upshot is he looked at over a period of time as to who was first out of the blocks in terms of offering the best rate. BNZ seems the best along with Westpac. You get there eventually on the longer term money. The point being is once you shake it all down, you guys are all the same. At the end of the day, and this backs up Nicola Willis's argument, at the end of the day, it's all the same.
And I was like, oh, wow, that's quite nice that, the largest radio station in the country is talking about our data. But I was like, oh, geez, maybe we'll get a letter from their compliance team. But having looked at the data, we do now know who has got the cheapest interest rates most of the time. So which bank typically has the lowest 1 year rate?
Yeah, so the 1 year rate tends to be the one that people are fixing for most often at the moment. So that's the one that I follow the most, and that's Kiwi Bank. So they had the lowest or co-lowest for 65% of the time. Now, what I mean by co-lowest, that means that they had the lowest, but also someone else had that same rate. So they were kind of first equal.
Yeah, so if like BNZ and Kiwi Bank were both offering the lowest rate, that counts as co-lowest for both of them.
Now, if we split that out, 48% of the time they were first equal, co-lowest, and when the times that they were the absolute lowest, they beat everyone else in the market. They were completely unmatched. No other bank was that as cheap as them. That was 17% of the time. And when you think about the fact that that's their market share is roughly 5%, I think.
Yeah, they're pretty small.
Pretty small. That's pretty impressive.
And then I also know that BNZ and TSB were not that far behind. And the other thing I'd say is if you like learning about money and property in this kind of simple way, make sure you hit the like button because that's how I know which videos we should do more of. And honestly, that helps with the YouTube algorithm. Subscribing, that helps too. And it'll mean that you get more videos like this. Now, what about the 2 year rate? Who was the cheapest there before we crown the overall winner of the cheapest bank over this 2 year period?
Okay, so if you're less of a commitment phobe and you prefer the 2 year rate, that's when Westpac takes over. So they were the lowest or the co-lowest 72% of the time.
That's good, eh?
Really good. With ASB and TSB next with the co-lowest for 56% of the day's track.
But I also think it's important to mention some of the hidden bank discounts because sometimes if you only look at the advertised interest rates, it can be a little bit I don't want to say misleading because it's not misleading, but it's not the whole picture. So if you look at ANZ and we just look at their 4 and 5 year rates, at the moment their 5 year rate is 5.39%, whereas some other banks are down at 4.99. And one of the things you've got to just take into account is not every bank, and especially ANZ, they don't have what's called special interest rates for the 4 and 5 years, which means they advertise a higher rate. But if you go into the bank or get a mortgage out and you say, I'd like to fix for 5 years, often you will get a substantially lower rate. So if you go into the ANZ Bank app right now and try and fix for 5 years, it would not surprise me if they were matching BNZ and Westpac's lower 4.99% rate. And so the rate that they're advertising is not necessarily the rate they will show you like in the bank app. I mean, in many ways, wouldn't it be nice if we just got rid of all of these separate bank discounts and the rate was just the rate?
Yeah. That would make things a lot easier.
Because then you'd just be able to compare it. But the thing is that those like secret rate discounts, those change all the time. So it's easier for the banks to be competitive there, even though consumers can't see it.
And also, I guess, if you're a bank and you've got a client with, $3 million worth of debt, maybe then you give them a bigger discount than the person that has a $50,000 debt.
Yeah, that's fair. Now, if we look at all rates and we just say, if we look at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 year rate and the 18-month rate, who has tended to be the cheapest overall, or at least been advertising the lowest rates over the last 2 years?
Now, overall, the top award goes to Westpac. So they've consistently been competitive across the boards. They had the co-lowest rate 54.5% of the time. We'll call it 55% of the time. And strictly lowest rate, almost 20% of the time, 19.3% of the time.
So about what's that, 74, 73% of the time, Westpac had the lowest rates. And to be honest, it wasn't among the 1 year rate. It was especially among those longer term rates where Westpac has been more competitive in terms of the rates that they're advertising.
Okay, so that's probably an interesting point as well, because you might hear that and go, okay, well, I just want the cheapest rate, so I'm going to go to Westpac. But that might not necessarily be the case if you want to go for a 1 year fixed rate.
Now, if we look at some honourable mentions, after that, we've got BNZ, ASB and Kiwibank have been quite competitive. ANZ and TSB have been slower to move. They have not been quite as competitive as some of those other banks.
But again, every dog has its day in banking. So you might have a bank that has better criteria for what you're looking for, because you're an overseas investor, for example, or maybe they are going to give you a better rate, but it's just not publicly advertised or at the time. So you take this with a grain of salt.
Oh, 100%. Like I would not be like, okay, I am not going to go to ANZ because they sometimes have slightly higher rates being advertised. The other thing that people really need to focus on, and this is actually what I was saying to Susan, is, well, what are the products that each bank has? So, for instance, TSB and ANZ, based on this 2 year window, we're not advertising the cheapest rates quite as often. However, both ANZ and TSB right now do 10-year interest-only mortgages. Now, I'm a property investor, so I look at a 10-year interest-only mortgage and say, yes, please. That's going to mean that I've got a lot of certainty, a lot of confidence about what my cash flow is going to be over the next 10 years. So even if I was paying 0.1% more for my mortgage,
who cares?
I don't care.
Yeah.
I want the 10-year interest-only mortgage. Similarly, sometimes you'll have different lending criteria. So I know for some banks at the moment, they are willing to lend more money against new build properties, while some other banks might not. So if I can find a bank that's going to let me do that, well, the product, what they are willing to offer me, is more important than necessarily the price. It's a little bit like I don't always go for the cheapest car. I go for the best one for me. Sometimes that will be in paying slightly more and able to get in order to get that, but I want the right product. But it's quite hard to compare like the different bank products. I mean, a lot of New Zealanders probably think, well, a mortgage is a mortgage. I'm just borrowing money and money's fungible. You know, $1 from one bank's the same as $1 from another. Well, actually, that's not always the case, but it can be quite difficult to see that. So I always say you want to get yourself a good mortgage advisor. And if you are looking for a mortgage advisor, you're like, I don't know which one to pick, then you might consider using our team at Opus Mortgages, because they can look at your situation and say, this is who we think is the right bank for you. And I'll drop a link down in the description if you want to check them out and book a meeting with them. So now you know which bank has the cheapest rates most of the time, but the next question you need to answer is, if you do get a mortgage, how do you use it to grow your wealth rather than kill your wealth? Which is why you need to watch this next video, where I'll show you my 9-step property blueprint to retire rich at 55. Click the video on your screen and I'll see you there.